As Microsoft battles it out with the FTC, we've learned a lot about their strategy and how they made the wrong bet. Day 3 has come, day 3 has gone. Microsoft is in the courts again, battling it out with the FTC, and again, a bunch of documents got unsealed, and again, a bunch of people took court stands, including Jim Ryan, and we learned just a smattering of information about the internal workings of Microsoft, and I find this stuff fascinating because we understand how Microsoft places bets, how they try to manage and measure their success and grow the business, and truly, just try to entrench themselves in the industry, and all of this comes out when a company is trying to spend $70 billion to buy Activision and the acquisition that is heard around the world, my friends. So let's just dive into a lot of information because, well, Microsoft actually made a wrong bet. And while I'm not going to read this entire document, it sheds a lot of light about the console availability that Microsoft struggled with for a long time. Now, if you're a fan of Xbox or console gaming in general, you already know that trying to find a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox has been hard. And especially on the Xbox side, the Series X has been particularly hard to come by. And in this document, in an email written by Phil Spencer, and he says, so when the question comes up about why don't we have more Xbox consoles right now, there are many factors, but I think we aren't really focusing on the right issue. We are focusing on the yield miss for Scarlet or the Halo launch dates miss. Now, quick little pointer here. The yield miss, what he's referring to is when a wafer or when a chip is coming down the line, they come in those circle things. You've probably seen them in an Intel commercial or whatever. And so the key here is to get the maximum number of chips you can expect on that circle thing known as a wafer as you possibly can. So if you're expecting, let's say, I think in this case, they were expecting 56 good chips to come down on a wafer. So then you do that math and say, okay, we got 100 wafers. We got X amount of chips coming. We can build this number of consoles. Well, when they say the yield is missing, it means that they weren't actually getting 56 out of that big giant wafer. They were actually, I believe, getting closer to 52, which you're like, okay, that's only 4. But when this thing is coming down the assembly line, having 4 less consoles per wafer really adds up really quickly. And so that's what he was hitting at there, is that they were actually missing they were missing things because of that. But don't focus on that. He said, from a strategy perspective, and this is the key part here. From a strategy perspective, I believe in our trade-off for cloud and content and gaming over console volume. I would obviously love to invest in all unconstrained, but I completely support trade-offs we are making, meaning like you have to give and take, right? If you invest in one area, some other area is going to suffer. And in this case, they were investing in cloud gaming, knowing that the Xbox Series X consoles would be constrained because those chips are going into their cloud platform. That is the trade-off that he's referring to here. And this is the point that I'm getting at, is that this is the bet that Microsoft likely missed on. So Microsoft, remember, was all in on cloud gaming. They were saying like xCloud is the new thing. Streaming is everywhere. At one point, they were going to build a dedicated streaming box known as Keystone, and they eventually pulled back on that because they felt that market wasn't actually materializing. And so much so that Xbox's Sarah Bond recently said during this whole process that they abandoned plans for a standalone Xbox cloud service. So what am I getting at here? Microsoft made the bet by taking their chips and putting them in the cloud, thinking that market was going to take off, that market is where they were going to see growth, and they did not. So that means, because they made that decision, that you could not get a Series X console as easily, because again, they were shoving them in data centers, thinking xCloud was truly going to be the thing that was going to really blow it up for Microsoft, but unfortunately, it did not materialize. This doesn't mean that Microsoft is in a bad position and that this was a waste. This is business. They had an expectation that this is how they were going to get into mobile. It didn't materialize. They shifted their strategy, and now they're building more consoles and they're moving on. He goes on to say, so while we talk about yield as our issue with the Xbox Series S and X today, there is some small truth to that, but in reality, our yield was on plan right now, we'd still feel the same constraints and customer sentiment, meaning that if yield was improved, they would still be shoving these things into the data center. We could sell more consoles this year, and next year there is demand. So effectively, Phil's saying like, look, These consoles will sell when we eventually get them on the shelves. Let's get our competitive advantage ahead of the strategy, or ahead of the market, and get everything into the cloud, because that is Microsoft's growth strategy. Now, there's another email from 2019 that has been not well received, and this has been a key point from the FTC all around, and it's related to the Matt Booty email. Now, this is from 2019, which is important, and I'll explain why. He says, a different view to the general view below might be that we, Microsoft, are in a very unique position to be able to go spend Sony out of business. Go spend Sony out of business. That is not something you want brought up when you are in a monopoly-styled court case with the FTC, is saying we can spend somebody out of business. He says, if we think that video games matter in 10 years, we might look back and say, totally would have been worth it to lose $2 to $3 billion in 2020 to avoid a situation where Tencent, Google, Amazon, or even Sony became the Disney of games and owned most of the valuable content. For example, it is practically impossible for anyone to start a new video game streaming service at scale at this point. That is really important, and that's not something Microsoft really probably ever wanted inked in an email or really anything, because he's effectively saying, like, look, the market is cornered. Basically, the entrants who are in the market today are the only ones that can be there. Now, that may not be completely true, but there's some truth to the fact that it is very hard to grow up real quickly and build a game streaming service today. And this is like 2023, but this was even 2019 when you think about scale, you think about technology and all the things that need to be in place. And Matt goes on to say, Amazon has shown no ability to execute on game content. Content is the moat that we have in terms of a catalog that runs on current devices and capability to create new. Sony is really the only other player who could compete with Game Pass, and we have a 2-year, 10 million sub lead. That is really big stuff about how Microsoft was thinking. Now, Microsoft's lawyers did come out and say, like, look, we've kind of changed strategy here. Of this was back when they thought xCloud and cloud streaming was going to be the complete end-all solution. And as we know, it really has not been. And there's more to that story because Jim Ryan of PlayStation fame or Sony fame really had a lot to say about this as well. So I'm going to roll some B-roll here while we dig through it. When Jim Ryan was on the stand in quotations because I believe it was a video deposition, some of which was blocked, but some of his emails have come out. He says, it is not an Xbox exclusivity play at all, referring to Activision. They are thinking bigger than that they have cash to make moves like this. I've spent a fair amount of time with both Phil Spencer and Bobby Kotick over the past day, and I'm pretty sure we will continue to see Call of Duty on PlayStation for many years to come. So if Matt Booty's email was the shot, then this email is the chaser, because the FTC has been really playing up exclusivity and how this is going to ruin a lot of the market. And so what he goes on to say is that this deal would cement Microsoft as a player in mobile games. It strikes me as more of a King play than a Call of Duty. That is from Jim Ryan. And that is actually aligning to a lot of what Phil Spencer had written in previous emails, where he was saying, look, we don't have a good mobile strategy. We really don't. Microsoft is trying with the cloud gaming, but it's not working out at any scale. They don't have a meaningful play. And so Jim Ryan, to his credit, looked at this acquisition and probably assessed it pretty accurately. He's like, look, Call of Duty and all that stuff is a current now play. The growth, as we are well aware, is coming in mobile gaming, and Microsoft has zero really any entrenched value there, and that is what they're trying to add, which would be the inclusion of King. On the ability of, or on the Starfield exclusivity, Jim Ryan goes on to say, I don't like it, but I don't view it as anti-competitive, which is pretty true because Sony is very clearly, obviously, putting out exclusives that are only on their platform. And it'd be pretty ironic, and he would get ripped to shreds by lawyers if you say exclusivities are bad for the industry, and then they just sit up there and name all the exclusive titles that land on PlayStation, and the fact that Sony pays for content not to be on Xbox. That all falls right into it. But more importantly, one of the things that I think is interesting from Jim Ryan saying, he said, cloud technology will become a meaningful component of how gamers access games between 2025 and 2035. That is a huge time window, by the way. We're making significant investments in cloud in anticipation of it becoming a very meaningful way of how gamers access games. So here's an interesting take on this. From Sony's perspective, cloud gaming that Microsoft already has in play is too early. Actually, that is their opinion, and that they believe that that market will materialize sometime between 2025 and 2035. Nvidia is already in that market. We have Microsoft in that market, and Sony will be coming into that market by Jim Ryan's own statements. We don't know to what capacity and what the business model will be. We would expect it to be something like Game Pass Ultimate, right, where it's a feature, not a product, at least for now, until we see their whole technology stack come to play. But either way, as Microsoft is in this weird position of like where they were first to market, maybe not first to market, that might be overselling it, but a market leader, and then they're pulling back some. Here's Sony saying like, look, we're making investments now so that for between 2025 and 2035, if this takes off, we are well positioned. It's just a little bit of a yin and a yang experience that is going on between Microsoft strategy, Xbox strategy, the FTC, and so it's still really up in the air. There was a lot of economic experts on the stand, and it wasn't all that thrilling. You had an economic expert from the FTC saying, yes, this is absolutely bad. This is what it is. And the judge, I believe, actually pointed out that the FTC expert didn't do correct calculations because they only assumed that all Activision titles would be pulled off instead of potentially Call of Duty. It doesn't really matter when you have these two types of experts. Of course, the economic expert provided by Microsoft, guess what? They're going to back Microsoft's side. And guess what? The economic expert provided by the FTC is going to back the FTC side. That is just kind of, that's why would anything else happen other than that? So that is like the nutshell version of what happened in day 3. So tomorrow we will hear from Bobby Kotick, which should be interesting, but more interesting, at least for me, Satya Nadella will testify around 1:30 p.m. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for what the CEO of Microsoft has to say about all this. And as always, my friends, if you want to stay updated on everything happening with Microsoft, FTC, and the Xbox, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.